Hey guys, today we will be focusing on two Senate elections that are must-wins for Democrats this year, and two Senate elections that will almost spell guaranteed victory for Democrats overall. If Democrats can maintain their seat in Arizona and flip Pennsylvania, they will have a very good chance at winning at least 50 seats. Because when looking at the map right now, Ohio is still likely to go to Republicans, and Catherine Cortez Masto is not doing very well in Nevada, which means that if Adam Laxalt flips the state, Democrats are going to have to win the three remaining races in gray, and a win in Georgia is not going to occur until a runoff in December. But if Democrats get to at least 49 seats and Georgia would be their 50th, Democrats will have the momentum going into the election and elect Raphael Warnock. If Warnock is going to lose, then of course Democrats will not win the majority, but if Democrats can get to at least 49 seats and make Georgia the deciding state, higher turnout will result in a victory for Democrats. So right now, they should not worry too much about the Georgia race because that will not actually occur until December, because we are going to get a runoff, as both Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock are nowhere near the 50% threshold. But Arizona and Pennsylvania do not require a majority of votes for a candidate to be elected. And so over the last couple of days, we've gotten a whole ton of new data for these two Senate elections. Pennsylvania, John Fetterman is doing much better in the polling, while in Arizona, Mark Kelly maintains a pretty solid lead that he's had throughout the entirety of this election cycle. So today, we'll be taking a look at Democrats' prospects in these two must-win races. And so we're going to start off with the election in Pennsylvania. This is the race that everyone is talking about because John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz are starting to be more and more competitive as election day nears. When looking at the polling average, John Fetterman now only maintains a 2.6% lead against his Republican counterpart. And when looking at the numbers just at the beginning of this month, Fetterman was ahead by 6 points, and at one point last month, he was ahead by 11. John Fetterman's lead has definitely shrunk over the last couple of weeks, but he is still in a relatively good position to succeed Pat Toomey. He will be retiring in early 2023 when his third term ends. So when looking at the latest numbers, John Fetterman is still leading in practically every single poll. In fact, this Whig poll is the first poll to ever show Mehmet Oz leading against the Democratic Lieutenant Governor. And two polls that I do want to highlight are the two recent polls from Rasmussen Reports and the Trafalgar Group. Both of these polls are pro-Republican pollsters. I would say the Trafalgar Group is a bit more of, but Rasmussen Reports is very pro-Republican as well, and one of Donald Trump's favorite pollsters when he was in office. And both of these pollsters still have John Fetterman winning by 2%. Fetterman was never going to defeat Oz by an 11-point margin, even by a 6-point margin. Pennsylvania was always going to have a close Senate race, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now. The numbers are reflecting what we should be seeing, and ultimately, the election can go both ways, but the fact that the most Republican pollsters in the country right now are still projecting a Fetterman win does say a lot about the fact that John Fetterman is still the slight favorite, even though the race has tightened. And when looking at the 530 forecast, he still does have a 60% chance at winning a seat currently held by a Republican. And when looking at the overall trends, though, for Fetterman, we do see that his odds have dropped pretty significantly over the last couple of months, but he is still at a much better position than where he was when he was first nominated. When this forecast was first released and Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman were already the known candidates, John Fetterman only had a 36% chance at winning this election, 64 for Mehmet Oz, and that basically was when Oz peaked. After polls started to be released for this election, John Fetterman's odds climbed throughout the entirety of the summer, and they peaked at 83% for the Lieutenant Governor, but they have since come down by quite a bit. He now only has a 6 in 10 chance. Going from 5 in 6 to 6 in 10 is a pretty significant drop, and currently 530 projects a margin of victory of just 1.4% if the general election were to be held right now. The betting markets are even less favorable, though, to Fetterman. They actually give Mehmet Oz the slight advantage, giving him a 53% chance at defeating Fetterman, who only has a 49% chance at winning this election. However, the odds for Fetterman have gone up over the last few days. They went down pretty dramatically after Mehmet Oz was found to be ahead in this Whig poll. This was the first poll to ever show Oz leading, and he actually led by an astonishing 5 points, but of course it has since been drowned out by a whole ton of other new polls showing Fetterman in a better position. And so when looking at the 90-day graph here, we see that Fetterman's odds went up pretty significantly in September, as we also saw with the 530 the forecast, but his odds did drop by quite a bit in the early weeks of this month. And of course, after this Whig poll was released showing Oz leading, he did actually drop to a point where he was lower than Oz in terms of his chances of winning, and now they have gone up by quite a bit in just the last day after these more favorable polls. But as of right now, we still have basically a statistical tie between both John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz for this seat. Of course, Mehmet Oz is not that great of a Republican nominee, but John Fetterman isn't as formidable of a candidate either. I think that if he did not have a stroke and his health was better, he would have a much better chance at winning this race. I mean, Joe Biden's health has been a major concern for independent and, of course, Republican voters, and John Fetterman being in a similar disposition is not helping his chances at winning this seat this year. But in the governor election, Josh Shapiro is still destroying Doug Mastriano. We are seeing two very different elections in Pennsylvania. Just look at this graph and compare it to the one between Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman. John Fetterman's lead has basically shrunk by 75% in just a month. He was up by 11 points, now just 2.6. And like I said before, John Fetterman's health has been basically his biggest issue throughout this campaign. He has not been able to be on the campaign trail much at all as a result of his recovery. And we're now just 2 weeks away from the election, and his health is really being called into question as to whether or not he could even serve. And yes, the answer is that he honestly could serve in the Senate and really won't be impaired in any way as a result of the recovery from his stroke, but Republicans are still making this a major issue, and Mehmet Oz has done a good job at doing this, and the fact that Republican voters are, and independents as well, of course, are more skeptical about Fetterman's ability as a result of his health is really starting to make an impact on his polling numbers. However, in the governor election, we're seeing that Josh Shapiro is still maintaining a very solid lead. He's up by double digits in basically every single poll, and the one Whig poll that had Oz up by 5 had Shapiro up by 2, and this is still an outlier, which shows that John Fetterman is still not doing that bad, even though he was down by 5. The governor poll showed a much closer race than usual, so this poll was definitely an outlier according to both the governor and Senate trends that we've seen over the last couple of months. And the final big thing I want to focus on for this race is fundraising, where John Fetterman has raised $48 million over the last couple of months. Mehmet Oz, $35 million. Of course, this is as of the 30th of September, which means that the Pennsylvania election so far has been the most expensive one for any Senate race in the 2022 cycle, with almost $100 million having been raised, and they will hit the $100 million mark total because these reports are outdated, and the final month is when fundraising really starts to ramp up. John Fetterman has $4 million cash on hand, 4.2. Mehmet Oz has 2.5. So we do have an advantage for Fetterman in terms of money. Honestly, this isn't even that much money for the last couple of weeks, but they have already bought the ads that they're going to put on, so it's really not going to matter too much how much money they have at this point. It may help them a little bit, but they already have the airwaves filled with their ads that they've paid for already. So John Fetterman is doing much better in terms of fundraising than Mehmet Oz, but it's not nearly as one-sided as the fundraising we're going to see between Mark Kelly and Blake Masters in just a couple of minutes. But right now, just looking at the numbers alone, John Fetterman is seeing a much more grassroots support. In fact, he's raised $26 million from small individual contributions. 53% of the money he's raised has come from grassroots donations, while for Mehmet Oz, he's only raised $4 million, and this is just 10% of the money that he has raised. When looking at self-financing, 60% of the money that his campaign has come from his own pockets, $21 million. This really shows that John Fetterman has so much more momentum from the actual people that are going to vote compared to Oz. And so based on everything we have seen so far right now, if I had to bet on one candidate for the race in Pennsylvania, it would be John Fetterman. And right now I do have the state of Pennsylvania as a tilt Democratic one. I think that John Fetterman still maintains a very slight but noticeable advantage in this election, at least as of 2 weeks out, 13 days away. And of course, we're going to have the debate, and that may have an impact. But really, most of the Senate debates haven't really had too much of an effect on the races that debates have been for, especially in Ohio, despite by strong performances from Tim Ryan. And then in Florida with Val Demings, those races haven't really changed too much. But in Pennsylvania, despite the race getting closer and closer, John Fetterman was at a very good position to begin with. And so even though his numbers have gone down by quite a bit, he does have a lot of cushioning, and so he still is ahead by a pretty considerable margin. Joe Biden, of course, only won Pennsylvania by 1.2% in 2020. And so all Fetterman needs is more votes. He only needs a win. He's not need to win by any sort of big margin. And so right now, I do think that is still possible, which is why the state is tilt for him. And now moving on to Arizona, another race that, of course, Democrats must win this year. Here, Mark Kelly is running for his first full term in office after being elected in the 2020 special election. And so that special election was crucial for Democrats in 2020 because without it, they would not have gotten to 50 seats as Martha McSally was the incumbent at the time. And so when looking at the Arizona race this year, we're seeing Blake Masters be a pretty mediocre nominee. That's one of the main reasons why Republicans have struggled. Arizona should not have been that hard of a state for the GOP to flip. Yes, Donald Trump lost the state in 2020 to Joe Biden by 0.3%, but that was 0.3%. The natural environment this year is much better for Republicans than it was 2 years ago. And Democrats also, of course, won the other seat in 2018 when Kyrsten Sinema defeated Martha McSally, but that race was also in a year that was very favorable for the Democratic Party. And so this year, I think Mark Kelly is going to do worse than both himself and Sinema in their last elections, but I do think he is on track to winning re-election. Just look at the latest polling here. Mark Kelly leads by 4.5% against Blake Masters. Yes, this race is also getting closer, but just like in Pennsylvania, Mark Kelly was never going to win by 8.9 points. That was never going to happen. This 4.5% lead is much more reasonable, and looking at basically every single poll that has ever been released for this election, Mark Kelly's led in every single one of them. Blake Masters has really done pretty terribly in the polling, and of course the numbers were higher for Kelly because of many of these very bad pollsters, especially the polls from Senate Street PAC. When we look at the more reliable pollsters, they do suggest a very close race, which is what we should be seeing, and the Trafalgar Group still does have Mark Kelly winning his election. Of course, just like in Pennsylvania, Mark Kelly doesn't have to win by big margin to win. He only needs to get more votes. A 1-point margin is enough for him to win re-election. And so based on the numbers that we're seeing right now, Mark Kelly is in a better position than John Fetterman, and the fact that he is an incumbent is also a huge electoral asset. And so you can see this in the 530 forecast as they do reflect the fact that Mark Kelly is in the dominant position right now. He has a 74% chance at winning his re-election, 26 for challenger Blake Masters. And when looking at how the odds have changed over the last few months, we see a very similar trend to the one that we have in Pennsylvania, where the numbers have gone down since mid-September for Kelly, but they definitely have not gone down as much as they did for Fetterman. So Mark Kelly right now, 74% chance. When he first started, he only had a 61% chance, and of course he peaked just a couple of weeks ago. And right now, 538 is projecting a 3.8% margin of victory for the Democrat. I think this margin is a little bit too big. I don't think Mark Kelly is going to do quite this well, but I do think that he is definitely the clear favorite, and he will be very, very difficult to defeat, despite Arizona being a winnable state this year. And so when looking at the list of the closest races, Pennsylvania and Arizona come in at 3rd and 4th place. Only Nevada and Georgia are closer right now than these two elections. And Nevada and Georgia, one of them has to go to a Democrat, and I think in the end that's going to be Georgia because of the runoff election that will occur after Democrats presumably win Pennsylvania and Arizona. Of course, if Democrats can't win even a single one of these races, they are probably going to lose their majority, and Republicans are probably going to win Georgia if Democrats lose the momentum and can't capture Pennsylvania or hold on to Arizona. And so the Senate races are really going to be very competitive this year, and I think that looking at this forecast, we see that Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada are clearly going to be the most important elections. And then when looking at the governor election, Kari Lake leads by 1.1%. So Katie Hobbs is not going to have any positive impact on the race for Senate for Democrats. And Mark Kelly right now is outperforming her by 5.6%. Now the good news here is that for Mark Kelly to lose, if we do take the polling differences between the numbers for Masters and Lake into account, Kari Lake is going to have to win by 5.6% if Mark Kelly is going to lose to Blake Blake Masters, because right now Mark Kelly is up by 4.5, and that to the 1.1% lead for Kari Lake. This, of course, means that if Kari Lake is indeed doing 5 points better than Masters, she's going to have to win by 5 points for Masters to defeat Kelly. And so Kari Lake is doing very well because she does have experience as a local TV anchor, and so she's doing a very good job at playing towards the media. And of course, her refusal to debate, or Katie Hobbs' refusal to debate Kari Lake, has been detrimental to the Democrats' campaign for governor. Katie Hobbs has said that Kari Lake just lies way too much and a debate wouldn't be substantive, but honestly, when trying to pander to a state that has a huge chunk of voters being Republican and also a huge independent voter base, that is not a good thing. Independent voters aren't going to be as biased against what Kari Lake is saying as a Democrat like Katie Hobbs, and so I think that her refusal to debate is going to be a major mistake. And at this point, the point has been driven in so much by Kari Lake in her campaign that I think is unrecoverable for Hobbs, even if she does decide that she wants to campaign. Of course, that's not going to happen. The debate season is already over. And so the Arizona governor election right now, I do think that Republicans have the clear advantage in, but it's going to be closer than the Senate race. I think that Kari Lake is not going to do as well as Mark Kelly, but both elections are going to be close. But I do think there will be a lot of split ticketing in favor of Kelly for the Senate and Lake for the governorship. Of course, Doug Ducey in 2018 won by 14 points to a second term. So Republicans have had a pretty strong grasp on the governorship in the state, and it looks like that 2022 is not going to be the year in which Democrats flip that around. And then when looking at fundraising, this is the last thing we're going to go over for this election. Mark Kelly is destroying Blake Masters. Mark Kelly, as of the 30th of September, has raised $73 million. Blake Masters is not even at 10. And when looking at these numbers a little bit closer here, from small individual contributions, Mark Kelly has raised $31 million. This is 43% of the money he has raised so far, and currently he has $13 million cash on hand. That really is a lot. While for Blake Masters, he has $2.8 million cash on hand, and only 16% of his contributions have come from small individual donations, just $1.6 million. In fact, 10% was self-financing, and Blake Masters does have $6 million from large contributions. And of course, Peter Thiel, who was a major donor to J.D. Vance's campaign in Ohio, has chosen to abandon Vance and in fact support Blake Masters and his chances at defeating Mark Kelly. So when looking at fundraising for both elections, it's clear Democrats have the advantage in terms of fundraising, as they do have much more grassroots support. John Fetterman and Mark Kelly overall are much better candidates than Mehmet Oz and Blake Masters. And if you disagree with me, just look at the numbers here. Blake Masters and Mehmet Oz should be winning just because they're Republicans in very close races in a year that should be a right-of-way year, but we're just not seeing that because they're just not good choices by their party. And so right now in Arizona, I'm going to give the state a lean Democratic rating. I think the election is going to be close. It's not going to be closer to a 5-point margin. It's more going to be a 2 to 3 point margin max. I think even a 1-point margin is possible, but I do think Arizona is going to be more liable for Democrats than Pennsylvania, especially because they have an incumbent that is relatively popular. And of course, if this does end up happening, Democrats are going to have to win Georgia, which I think is very possible if Mark Kelly and John Fetterman both do win, because Democrats will have that enthusiasm. And when more people vote, Democrats win. There simply is a larger pool of Democratic voters, but Republicans are better at coming out. Republicans are also relatively older, and so that's one of the main assets that they have, especially in midterm years when turnout is low. But I think that if it does come down to Georgia, Raphael Warnock will have an even better chance at winning than he does right now. I think in the first round, he will get to a plurality, but getting to 50% will be very, very difficult, especially with a libertarian candidate in the race. And so that will be it for this video. Pennsylvania, Arizona must wins for Democrats, but not at all guaranteed. And so I will keep you guys updated on these two elections over the next couple of weeks. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.